Later that evening, the sun had already sunk low by the time they made it to the old truck parked at the edge of the pinewoods. Caleb opened the passenger side gently and helped Leah climb in. She winced, tired to the bone, but didn't say a word about it. Inside, the silence returned. Not the stiff, heavy silence from earlier that day, but something softer, sadder, like grief breathing quietly between them. As he turned the key, Caleb glanced over at her. "I'm not expecting a thank you," he said. Leah kept her eyes on the road ahead. "Good," she murmured, "because I'm not sure I've got any left in me." He gave a small nod, and that was it. They rode in silence for close to an hour. The gravel crunched under the tires, and cold air whispered through a crack in the window. Finally, Caleb broke the quiet. "I live up in the hills," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but there's food, running water, and a roof over your head." "I won't be dead weight," Leah replied quickly. "I can pull my share. I've worked all my life." Caleb shook his head slowly. "That's not what this is about. You're not here to earn your place. You're here because you're safe now." Leah shut her eyes and leaned against the cool glass. The baby shifted gently inside her, nudging just beneath her ribs, like it, too, could sense that something had changed. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe a place where hope could begin. The cabin stood alone at the edge of Elk Ridge, tucked beneath the shadow of tall fir trees and wrapped in the soft hum of wind through pine. There was no fence, no porch light, no warm welcome, just time-worn timber, a sagging tin roof, and a faint trace of cedar smoke rising from the chimney. Caleb steered the truck up the gravel path, headlights sweeping across the steps. He didn't say anything. He usually didn't unless it mattered. Leah hadn't asked where they were going. She hadn't asked a single thing, really. She just held her belly and sat still. As the truck rolled to a stop, the cabin door creaked open. A small boy appeared in the doorway, barefoot and pale, wearing an oversized shirt that fell past his knees. His hair was messy and dark, his wide brown eyes filled with equal parts curiosity and caution. This was Owen Hart, Caleb's son. 8 years old, diagnosed with severe social anxiety and selective mutism after losing his mother 3 years ago. He'd barely spoken since. Caleb stepped out, walked around, and opened Leah's door again. He held out his hand. She hesitated, not from fear, but because everything inside her felt paper-thin. Like one wrong move could make it all fall apart. Still, she reached out and took his hand. Owen didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stood in the shadows, watching this unfamiliar woman step into what had once been only a quiet, grieving world. Inside, the cabin was dim but neat. A small living room with a stone hearth in one corner and a neatly stacked pile of firewood. The kitchen was modest, just a sink, a stove, and a table with 2 chairs. A handmade quilt hung over the back of a rocking chair. The air smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something sweet she couldn't name. Leah lingered near the doorway, unsure. "I can take the floor," she said, like it was automatic. "I don't need much." Caleb shook his head. "The couch folds out. Sheets are clean. It's more comfortable than the floor." She nodded, but her hand stayed right where it was resting on her belly. He noticed. "I'll get some water boiling," he said, already heading toward the stove. "There's tea in the cabinet if you'd like some." Owen remained by the doorway, eyes flicking from his father to Leah, then back again. Leah turned slightly and offered him the softest smile she could manage. She had once taught music, whole classrooms full of children. But this was different. This boy wore his silence like a wound. "You must be Owen," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Not a nod, not a sound. But he didn't run either. And that counted for something. Later that night, after the tea had cooled and Leah had managed to eat a little toast, she sat on the edge of the pull-out bed. Her fingers traced the faded floral pattern of the sheets. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt clean fabric or warmth that didn't come attached to fear. Caleb handed her a pillow. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said. "Hot water's slow, but it gets there." "Thank you," she whispered. He paused, standing just past the doorway, awkward like he wasn't sure what came next. Then, more quietly than before, he added, "You're safe here, Leah. I don't know what the future looks like, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need." She looked up at him, her face unreadable. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated for a long second, then said, "Because someone should have done this for my wife. But no one did." She didn't press him further, and he didn't say anything else. It was enough for now. Owen sat outside the room, his small back against the wall, quietly listening. Not to the words, but to the pauses, the tone, the rhythm. Kids like him learned to hear the things adults didn't say. And he had never heard his father's voice sound like that before. Still tired, but softer, exposed. And Leah, she hadn't tried to force him to speak. She hadn't tried to fill the silence with nervous chatter the way grown-ups usually did. Maybe she was different. Leah didn't sleep much that night. The baby was active, shifting around as if it too was trying to understand where they were. She lay on her side, hand over her stomach, watching the last flickers of firelight draw slow-moving shadows on the ceiling. There had been a moment, just one back in that brutal field, when she truly thought it was the end, that no one would come forward, that the final piece of her dignity would be sold off for next to nothing. And then Caleb had. He didn't look like a rescuer. He looked like a man who hadn't smiled in years, someone who carried grief in the corners of the house, in the rusted tools out front, in the framed photo of a woman Leah had glimpsed above the mantel. But he had stepped up, and maybe, just maybe, he'd saved himself a little too, though he hadn't realized it yet. At dawn, Leah woke to the sound of water boiling. She stretched slowly, joints stiff from the night, and made her way to the kitchen. Owen was already there, perched at the table in his sleep shirt, drawing quietly on a whiteboard with a marker. When he noticed her, he didn't hide it. He simply turned it around and showed her. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one with a round belly. Below them, a little cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. Leah blinked back tears. "Is that us?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Owen didn't speak, but he nodded once, and that was enough. The light in Elk Ridge came in gently, never all at once. It slid through the pine trees and touched the windowsill like a quiet guest who didn't need to knock. Leah sat there with a chipped ceramic mug in her hands, steam curling from the rim like soft ghosts rising into morning. She hadn't spoken yet. She was just listening. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Caleb's slow footsteps, his usual early morning pacing, and then lighter, the small shuffle of feet. Owen. He stood in the doorway, whiteboard still in hand, the cap of the marker held tightly between his lips like a habit. His eyes darted toward her, then away, but he didn't turn back. "Morning, sweetheart," she said gently. He froze. Her voice wasn't sugary, wasn't loud, just warm, familiar, like the sunrise. After a moment, he scribbled something on the board and turned it around. "You don't talk like the others." Leah's lips parted, not from surprise, but because she understood. She set the mug down and nodded. "That's because I used to speak to kids every day. I taught music." Owen tilted his head, then erased, wrote again. "You taught songs?" "I did," she said, a soft smile on her lips. "Hundreds of them, from Twinkle, Twinkle to Beethoven's Ninth." He erased again and slowly printed another question. "Do you still sing?" Her hand fell to her belly without thinking. "I haven't, not in a while. But maybe it's like riding a bike." She stood carefully and moved to the cabinet beside the fireplace. Caleb had once mentioned that his late wife kept a harmonica there. Leah found it beneath an old tea towel, tarnished, but whole. Owen watched every move. His eyes narrowed, tracking her carefully. He didn't blink as she wiped it with the hem of her dress and raised it to her lips. The first notes wobbled, not from lack of ability but from time. But soon, a melody found its way out, gentle, simple, familiar. The kind of tune that lingers in old-school hallways. The kind that makes kids stop mid-step and teachers hum as they grade. Owen gripped his whiteboard, still, silent, listening. And from the hallway, Caleb stopped moving too. By mid-morning, Leah had already cleared the table, washed the dishes. She moved more easily now, not because her body was stronger, but because something inside her had begun to shift. Something inside her had shifted. It was like feeling life return to a limb that had been numb for too long. Purpose trickled back into her quietly, but surely. Caleb walked into the kitchen with an old toolbox under his arm, clearly planning to check on the generator behind the cabin. He gave a small nod toward the harmonica still resting on the table. "It's been a while since I heard that tune," he said. Leah glanced up at him. "I figured it was time this house remembered what music sounded like." Caleb paused at the door. "Owen liked it," he murmured. "He hasn't sat still that long in weeks." Leah's voice softened. "He's comfortable with quiet. That's something we have in common." Caleb studied her for a beat, eyes thoughtful. Then he gave a subtle nod and stepped out, the screen door sighing shut behind him. She watched him go, the soft slam echoing behind him like punctuation. There was a heaviness in that man, not just the ache of loss, but the kind of guilt that builds invisible walls around you and convinces you it's safer to stay behind them. She knew that feeling. She carried a version of it herself. Later that afternoon, as slow-spinning clouds started to gather above the treetops, Owen approached Leah again with his whiteboard in hand. He'd written just one question: "What's the baby's name?" Leah placed her palm over her belly, pausing as she felt a flutter beneath it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Owen frowned in thought, then began scribbling again. "I think she likes your song." Leah chuckled, warm and surprised. She did give a pretty solid kick during the chorus. He erased the board and, with deliberate care, wrote a single word in large letters. "Joy." Leah went still. The marker squeaked slightly in his hand, but Owen wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on her belly, like he was waiting for a response from the life inside. "Joy," she repeated under her breath. "That's a beautiful name." Owen shrugged, trying to appear casual, but his ears flushed red. Leah reached out and gently touched just the edge of his hand. "I think she'll love that name too." And for the first time, Owen didn't pull away. That evening, Caleb came in from the woods with grease-stained hands and a scratch on his forearm from a stray branch. Leah met him at the door with a damp towel in hand. "Do you ever remember gloves?" she teased as she dabbed at the cut. "Only when I'm not fixing things that should have broken a decade ago," he replied. "Like this whole cabin?" He gave a crooked, weary smile. "Exactly like that." She paused, then said softly, "Owen named the baby." Caleb stopped in his tracks. "He said something?" "Not out loud," she explained, "but he wrote it down. He picked the name Joy." Caleb leaned back against the wall, processing. He nodded slowly. "That's a good name." Leah folded the towel and placed it on the table. "Do you mind?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her for the first time that day. "I think," he said, voice low and honest, "we could all use a little more of it." That night, after dinner, Owen sat cross-legged on the rug, quietly working on an old wooden puzzle. Leah rocked in the chair, humming the same melody from earlier, her fingertips absently stroking the curve of her belly. Caleb sat nearby, nursing a cup of coffee by the fire, eyes drifting between the two of them, and something deep inside him stirred, not with noise or big emotion, but quietly, steadily. A part of him long frozen had finally begun to thaw. The first snowfall of the season came earlier than anyone expected. It settled softly over the treetops like powdered sugar, tracing the bends in the mountain path with quiet finality. Caleb had warned that the cold was coming, but even he hadn't expected it this soon. By the time Leah opened the cabin door that morning, everything outside was white. The sky stretched pale and endless above her. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping herself in the flannel shirt Caleb had draped over a chair the night before. It still smelled like him, cedar, engine oil, and something gentler, like the pages of an old book left open too long. And then, in the snow, she spotted something unusual. A small box, wrapped in brown paper tied with simple twine. It sat squarely on the bottom step. No footprints, no tire marks, just the package resting as if the wind itself had placed it there. She looked around, but the woods were still. Not a soul in sight. Inside, she set the package on the table and began untying the twine with careful fingers. Owen wandered in behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his bare feet padding softly across the cold floor. He paused when he saw the box. "What's that?" Leah asked aloud, mostly to herself. Owen sat down at the table and pulled his whiteboard toward him. He wrote, "Mailman doesn't come here." Leah nodded slowly, then opened the box. Inside was a neatly folded wool blanket. Beneath it, a box of prenatal vitamins, a tin of cocoa, a packet of herbal tea, and a small bottle of lavender lotion. At the very bottom, tucked into a manila envelope, was a single sheet of thick parchment. No name, no address, no card, just a handwritten note in graceful, looping script. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone. Keep walking toward the light. M." Leah stared at the paper. She read the words again, and then once more. Owen leaned over to read it too, his brow furrowed. He tapped his whiteboard. "Who's M?" Leah didn't answer right away. She ran her fingers slowly over the ink, letting the words settle into her chest like a warm ember tucked against winter skin. "I don't know," she whispered, "but they see us." When Caleb came home that evening, his boots heavy with snow and his coat dusted white, he noticed the blanket immediately. It was draped over the couch where Leah sat crocheting with her legs tucked beneath her like she belonged there. He raised a brow. She nodded. "A package showed up this morning." His expression tightened slightly. "Any tracks?" "None." He walked to the table and picked up the folded note she'd left by the cocoa tin. As he read it, his jaw set. "Could be someone messing with us?" It didn't feel like a trick. "You sure?" Leah stood, moved toward him, and placed the bottle of prenatal vitamins in his hand. "Does this look like something someone would give us if they meant harm?" Caleb stared at the bottle, then at her. "No," he said softly. "It doesn't." That night, Leah couldn't fall asleep. She lay on the pull-out bed, the firelight dancing across the ceiling, her eyes fixed on the folded note sitting on the table. There was something about that handwriting, elegant, intentional, that tugged at old memories. Memories of warm classrooms, piano keys, daisy bouquets brought in by little hands. There had been a world full of kindness once. Before Derek, before the bruises, before the restraining orders and shattered promises. Now in this quiet, snow-covered cabin, that kindness had somehow found her again. In the days that followed, more packages arrived. One brought dried mango and almonds. Another carried baby socks, handmade, and a small jar of calendula cream. Everyone wrapped the same way. Everyone tucked with a note. Short, poetic, signed only. M. Caleb had tried tracking the mysterious deliveries once. He got up before dawn, drove around the property in a slow, deliberate circle, scanning every trail and shadow. But all he found were rabbit tracks and scattered pine needles. Either they've got wings, he muttered, shaking his head, or they're just smarter than both of us put together. Leah didn't push for answers. Instead, she simply folded each note and tucked it into an empty recipe tin she'd set aside in the kitchen drawer. Like a quiet prayer, she didn't know how to speak aloud. One evening, after the dishes had been cleared and the fire settled into a steady glow, Owen climbed up beside Leah on the couch with his whiteboard in hand. He wrote slowly, carefully, his tongue poking out a little from the corner of his mouth in concentration. Then he flipped the board toward her. "Do you think Em is watching us?" Leah thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled, soft and sure. "I think they're seeing us," she said. Owen scribbled again. "I like being seen." Leah reached over and ruffled his hair, and this time he didn't flinch. From the doorway, Caleb watched them quietly. He hadn't said anything aloud, but he could feel the change. The house, which had once been little more than a shelf full of echoes and empty space, now had life in it again. Laughter, music, the scent of rosemary and steeping tea. The quiet scratch of a child writing his thoughts to someone who treated them like treasure. And then there was Leah. She wasn't trying to fix him. She didn't dig for things he wasn't ready to share. But her presence, it had softened the sharp edges of his grief. He'd caught her humming earlier that day, gently swaying as she stirred a pot of soup on the stove. It wasn't a tune he recognized, but it was one he found himself wanting to learn. Later that night, with the fire down to glowing embers and the snow thickening outside, Leah returned to the couch and opened the small tin where she kept the notes. She slid in the newest one, reading it once more before letting it rest atop the others. "The world is dark, yes, but there are stars, and some shine brighter when you need them most." She closed the lid slowly with a reverence that made it clear these weren't just pieces of paper. They were proof that here, in a place the world had forgotten, she wasn't forgotten anymore. As the days shortened, dusk began arriving without ceremony, like a familiar guest who no longer bothered to knock. The snow, which once looked delicate and poetic, now settled heavy on the cabin roof and pressed against the windows. Leah moved more slowly now. She often cradled her lower back as she walked, wincing sometimes without realizing. The baby Joy, as Owen had so firmly named her, was getting stronger every day. Stronger than Leah ever thought anything growing inside her could be. One particular morning, the cabin was quieter than usual. Caleb had left early to help a neighbor clear a fallen tree from a broken fence. Leah stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of milk, watching snow drift sideways in the wind. The fire behind her popped lazily. Owen sat cross-legged nearby, working silently on a puzzle he'd finished a dozen times before, though it never seemed to bore him. Every so often he glanced up, not to speak, but just to make sure she was still there. She'd become his anchor, his quiet reassurance that the world was still steady. Then, without warning, something sharp shifted in her belly, and Leah gasped. She nearly dropped her mug. Owen's head snapped up. Leah laughed, not from amusement, but from pure surprise. Her hand flew to her stomach, fingers spreading out like she was trying to catch the movement. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, almost breathless. That was a kick." Owen leapt up, leaving the whiteboard forgotten on the floor. He hovered near her, unsure of what to do. Leah reached for his hand gently. "Here," she said softly, placing it over the curve of her stomach. For a moment, nothing. Then another kick. Owen's eyes went wide. His mouth parted, then closed again as he looked up at her, awe and hesitation tugging at his expression. Like he just felt something holy and wasn't sure if he was allowed to react. "She's saying hello," Leah whispered. "She knows you're here." Owen nodded once, then bolted for his board. When he turned it around, it read, "I think she likes me." Leah laughed through a tear and wiped it away with her sleeve. "She's already lucky to have you." That afternoon, Owen didn't wander far from her side. He helped chop vegetables, clumsy but focused. He set the table with careful precision, his small hands aligning forks and napkins like it truly mattered. When Caleb finally returned, covered in snow and sweat, he stepped into a house that felt warm, not just from the fire, but from the spirit inside it. Owen met him at the door and, without a word, took his gloved hand and gently tugged him in. After Caleb had peeled off his coat and sat down, Owen picked up the whiteboard and scribbled something quickly. She kicked. Caleb raised a brow. She? Owen nodded with firm conviction. Leah stepped in from the kitchen. She confirmed. And strong too. Caleb smiled, though it wasn't as wide or easy as theirs. It was quieter, more fragile. The kind of smile that only appears when something guarded starts to shift. Well, he said, I guess that makes it official. She's one of us now. That night, Leah sat by the fire in the old rocking chair, a blanket tucked over her lap. The harmonica rested on the table beside her, untouched but nearby. She was humming again. Not the same tune as before, but something new, something gentle and full of breath. Owen sat on the floor with a fresh notebook from one of the care packages. He wasn't writing, wasn't drawing, just flipping through the pages, listening. Caleb sat across from Leah, cradling a mug of coffee, his eyes tracing the firelight on her face. Are you really planning to name her Joy? He asked. The chair creaked softly beneath Leah as she paused. If she makes it, yeah. Caleb spoke faster than he meant to. She will. The words hung between them, solid, certain. Leah smiled, not so much at his certainty, but because he'd said it at all. Joy, he repeated under his breath. It fits. She kicked today, Leah added. Not just flutters. It was strong, like she's already trying to arrive. Caleb nodded slowly, gaze still on the fire. Sounds like someone else I know. Leah tilted her head. You? He gave a dry laugh. Not me. Owen. She looked over at the boy, now asleep on the rug, his head resting on the notebook like a makeshift pillow. Yeah, she whispered. He's braver than most grown-ups I've met. Caleb leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. I didn't think he'd connect with you. He doesn't connect with people. Not since. He trailed off, and Leah didn't fill the silence. She knew when quiet was more sacred than any answer. After a pause, she said softly, I didn't think I'd connect with anyone again either. Caleb looked up at her, something flickering behind his eyes. I guess we're both doing things we never expected. Later that night, Leah couldn't sleep. The baby was restless. So was her mind. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside. The snow had stopped. The moon hung overhead, casting a pale glow across the clearing, turning the forest silver. She sipped her tea in the silence. Everything was still. She thought about what the nurse had said long ago, before Derek had yanked her out of the clinic mid-appointment. Strong babies move early. They're fighters. Back then, she had no reason to believe it. Now she did. The cabin door creaked behind her. Caleb stepped into the cold, arms folded against the chill. His face wasn't surprised to find her there. She moving again? He asked. Leah nodded, smiling faintly. Feels like she's trying to kick her way out early. He leaned against the porch post beside her. I wouldn't blame her. The world's tough. But this place? It's starting to feel like something. She looked over at him. Like home. He hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. Yeah, he said. Something like that. And then, just before sunset, a knock. 3 sharp raps on the cabin door. No sound of a car. No crunch of footsteps in the snow. Just that knock. Sure of itself, cold as bone. Like it knew exactly why it was there. Leah froze in place. The wooden spoon locked in her grip so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Inside her, the baby went still, as if even she could sense something was wrong. Outside, Caleb was still in the shed, working on the busted snowblower. Owen sat at the table, his legs swinging slowly beneath his chair as he drew. The knock came again. Slower. More deliberate. Leah wiped her hands on a towel, heart pounding, and walked to the door. She unlocked it with trembling fingers, cracked it open just a sliver. And there he was. Derek. The same unkempt beard. The same lifeless stare. The same twisted smile that once made her skin crawl like something toxic. Evening, sweetheart, he drawled, as if this was some friendly check-in. As if he hadn't tried to auction her off like cattle in the middle of a field full of strangers. Leah stepped outside quickly, pulling the door just enough to block his view of Owen. You need to leave, she said, her voice low, cold. Cut from steel she hadn't used in years. Derek let out a short, bitter laugh. That any way to greet your husband? You stopped being that the moment you put a price on me. His gaze dropped to her stomach, lingering too long. Looks like you've settled in real nice. She didn't blink. This place isn't for you. His smile faded into something sharper. You really think some hillbilly mechanic can give you what you need? What that kid's gonna need? From behind her, Owen appeared quietly, peeking from the edge of the doorway. Derek noticed. Well now, who's this little guy? Leah stepped to the side, blocking his line of sight again. He's none of your business. Derek's tone turned mocking. Does Caleb know you're playing house with another man's wife? The words hit even though they shouldn't have. On paper, Derek was no longer her husband. In spirit, he never had been. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said evenly. And you're not coming near this child. Derek's eyes darkened. You think I can't take back what's mine? But before Leah could answer, another voice cut through the air behind her. Firm. Calm. Unshaken. You need to leave. Now. Caleb. He stood a few feet away, coat half unzipped, gloves stained with oil, snow still clinging to him. But his eyes, usually tired, quietly burdened, burned now with something else. Not anger. Clarity. Finality. Derek turned slowly. Well, the knight in flannel. Caleb didn't flinch. This isn't a threat. It's a promise. Derek stepped forward. You gonna stop me? Caleb didn't move. I won't need to. He tipped his head toward the trees. I'm not the only one watching. Derek looked past him, and for the first time something shifted behind his eyes. Far off in the woods, a flashlight flickered. Then another. Shadows moved between trees. Caleb had reached out to a few neighbors after the first mysterious package. Asked them to keep watch not because he was expecting trouble, but because trouble always had a way of circling back. You try anything, Caleb said steadily, and you won't leave these woods. Derek stared at him a beat longer, then spat into the snow and backed away. This ain't over. Caleb didn't raise his voice, just said clearly, no, it is. And then Derek turned and disappeared into the trees, his boots grinding through the snow with angry force. Back inside, Leah sank into a chair at the kitchen table, trembling. Owen stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I didn't think he'd come back. Caleb filled the kettle and set it on the stove, his voice low and even. They always come back. He glanced over at her. But so do we. Stronger. He knelt beside her, laid a rough, warm hand over hers. Are you all right? Leah looked into his face, really looked, and for the first time allowed herself to believe the steadiness in his voice. I think I will be, she said. Later that night, Leah sat on the porch wrapped in a thick quilt. The baby stirred inside her again, restless. So was her heart. But this time she didn't cry. What she felt now wasn't fear leaving her. It was courage finally arriving. Caleb joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "He's gone," he said quietly, settling beside her. "For now." He handed her the cup. "And just so we're clear, he doesn't come back. Not ever." She nodded slowly. Then after a long moment, she said softly, "You didn't have to step in like that." "But you did." Caleb looked down at his hands. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he admitted. "I wasn't there when I should have been before. For your wife." He nodded once. "She was sick. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, fixed more things, I could outrun it." He exhaled. "But I was wrong. I missed the moments that counted." Leah reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. "You didn't miss this one." He looked up at her. And for once, the silence between them wasn't hollow. It was full of everything they hadn't yet found the words for. Inside, Owen had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up beneath the blanket with her name stitched at the corner. Joy. The cabin no longer felt like just 4 walls and a roof. It felt like something beginning. Something not easier, but deeper. The kind of healing that starts in your bones and slowly works its way outward. As the night settled around them, Leah rested her hand gently on her belly and whispered, "You're safe now, little one. And you're going to be born in a house that chose kindness." The storm arrived fast, not drifting in like soft winter snow, but crashing in with a fury like the mountains were reclaiming everything that had been too still for too long. At first it was a low wind curling through the trees, making the tall pines lean as if whispering warnings. By nightfall it had become a full-blown howl. Snow lashed the windows in horizontal waves. The fire in the hearth raged, fighting off cold drafts seeping under the door. Leah stood at the kitchen sink, hands braced against the counter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The first pang had struck 2 hours earlier. The second came 20 minutes after that. Now they were barely 10 minutes apart. She hadn't spoken it aloud. Didn't want to scare Owen, curled up by the fire with his notebook. Didn't want to pull Caleb from the shed where he was reinforcing the roof. Didn't want to admit, even to herself, that the baby had chosen tonight to come. Another contraction gripped her tighter than the last. This time she dropped the dishcloth and caught herself on the table, letting out a low, strained sound. Owen's head snapped up. "Leah?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. She turned to him with a practiced smile, even as her knees trembled. "It's all right, sweetheart. She's just excited to meet us." Owen bolted to his feet, notebook still clutched in one hand. He ran straight for the door, yanked it open into a wall of swirling snow, and shouted into the wind, "Dad!" Moments later, Caleb burst through the door, soaked from head to toe. Snow clung to his beard and dripped from his coat. He took one look at Leah, pale, unsteady, hunched against the table, and understood instantly. "How far apart?" he asked quickly. 8 minutes, maybe 7, she said through gritted teeth, gripping the table edge as another wave surged through her. Caleb gave a steady nod, his movements swift but measured. "Owen, grab every clean towel we have, then get the first aid kit from under the sink." Without hesitation, Owen dashed into action. Leah glanced up at Caleb, her voice trembling. "There's no hospital within 30 miles. "I know. And the roads are already buried." "I know," he said again, this time more softly. He gently cupped her elbow and guided her, step by step, toward the pull-out bed near the fire, the warmest, safest place they had. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. "You won't," Caleb replied. "You're not alone." Then came the rhythm of labor. Contractions. Boiling water. Soaked towels. Leah's hands gripping the bed frame until her knuckles turned white. Caleb moved with silent focus, sleeves rolled up, speaking only when it mattered. "You're doing great, Leah. You're stronger than you know." She wanted to believe him. The pain she could face. She had always been able to face pain. But this fear was different. Not the fear of hurt, but the fear of loss. Of losing this child. Of losing herself. And then something unexpected. A voice. Soft. From across the room. "I'm here." Leah turned her head, sweat slicking her temples. "Owen." He was kneeling beside the bed, her hand in his notebook forgotten on the floor. He had spoken. 2 small words. The first he'd spoken in months. "I'm here." And Leah broke, not from agony, but from something far more powerful. Something deep and buried and rising again. She clung to his hand and sobbed. Not in fear anymore, but in belief. At 2:11 a.m., under a roof battered by howling wind and beside a fire that had dwindled to quiet embers, the baby came. Red-faced. Crying. Breathing in full, fearless gasps. Alive. Caleb swaddled her in a towel, his mechanic's hands softer than they'd ever been. Then, without a word, he placed her in Leah's arms. Leah held her close, trembling, tears falling into the baby's dark hair. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you now." Owen crawled onto the bed, laying his head gently on Leah's shoulder just above the baby. Caleb sank back onto his heels, chest rising and falling in relief, finally letting go of a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For the first time since his wife had passed, he felt the world shift, not backward toward sorrow, but forward, towards something new, something unnamed. Hours later, as the storm faded into a slow snowfall, Leah rested with joy curled up on her chest. Caleb sat nearby, rubbing warmth back into his hands and watching the glowing embers. "She's got lungs," he murmured. Leah smiled without opening her eyes. "She's got fire." The silence that followed was deep, not empty, just full. Then Leah spoke, voice low and rich with the weight of all they'd been through. "You saved us." Caleb shook his head gently. "You saved me." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Before you showed up," he said slowly, "I was just getting through the days. Wake up, work, keep Owen fed, keep the house standing. But I wasn't really living." He turned toward her now, his expression unguarded. "I didn't realize how much I'd lost until you reminded me that something better was still possible." Leah reached out and took his hand. "You gave me more than safety," she said. "You gave me a place where I could be more than someone's broken past. A place where she could be born." And for a long while, they stayed like that, fingers entwined, quietly marveling at what had just begun. Just as the first hints of morning blue touched the sky beyond the trees, there was a gentle knock at the door. Caleb stiffened. He opened it cautiously. No one stood there. Only a basket wrapped in red flannel resting on the porch. Inside, he found a hand-stitched baby blanket, a bundle of fresh oranges, and a single card. The handwriting familiar, elegant. "A storm always clears, and what survives it becomes something stronger. Welcome, little joy. M." Caleb glanced out toward the forest. Again, no prints. No sign of movement. Just snow. And quiet. He brought the basket inside and placed it on the table. Leah stirred. Her eyes opened. She saw the red flannel, the card, and smiled. "Still watching," she murmured. "Always," Caleb answered. And somewhere inside those humble wooden walls that had once echoed with silence and grief, something had changed forever. A child had been born. A family had formed. And hope, quiet, powerful, enduring, had come to stay. The storm had passed, but it left behind more than broken branches and icy trails. It left behind a stillness so complete it felt as though the mountain itself had paused to witness the miracle that unfolded inside the cabin. A life had entered the world, in the very heart of winter's fury. And somehow everything had held. Leah lay in bed, joy tucked beneath her chin. The baby's lips moved softly in sleep, her little face warm with firelight. Her breathing was easy now. Steady, right? She was no longer surviving. She belonged. Owen sat nearby, sketching carefully in his notebook the baby's first wail. Her tiny hand. The crackling fire. The storm outside. Across the room, Caleb moved through the cabin with quiet purpose. His steps were slower, his touch more deliberate, as if the home itself had been altered by what they'd endured. It felt sacred now. But beyond the cabin walls, the world was still watching. And it hadn't forgotten how to whisper. 2 days after the storm had cleared, the mail truck rumbled up the long path. Not with packages, but with rumors. Leah was living out there. She'd given birth. She'd brought trouble. By late afternoon, the visitors began. The first was Mr. Jasper, the feed store owner from down in town. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in hand, shifting between knocking or walking away. Before he could decide, Caleb opened the door. Jasper cleared his throat, uneasy. "Heard some things," he mumbled. "Just figured I'd come by, see for myself." Caleb didn't respond. Just waited. Jasper cleared his throat. "They're saying you took in a woman who was, well, sold. That she's got a baby now. That she's not your wife." Caleb's eyes narrowed just slightly, but his tone stayed steady. "All of that's true." The older man blinked in surprise. "You're not denying it?" "Why would I?" Caleb replied, stepping further out onto the porch, letting his words land with quiet force. "You want to hear something else that's true?" Jasper blinked again. "She's brave," Caleb said. "She brought my son's voice back. And she gave birth to a little girl right here when most men would have walked away and left her to suffer." He paused. "And not once has she asked for more than a warm place to stand." Jasper lowered his gaze, his thumb tracing the brim of his hat. "People are talking, Caleb. Saying it ain't right." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Let them talk." His voice was low but firm. "I'd rather stand beside someone the world tried to throw away than side with the world that did the throwing." There was a quiet beat of silence. Then Jasper gave a small nod, turned to leave, but stopped. "I brought diapers," he said, voice softer now, handing over a small plastic bag. "My granddaughter dropped them off. Told me to bring them here." Caleb took the bag, nodded once. "Appreciate it." By the third day, more people had come. The woman from the post office arrived with a basket of fresh-baked bread. The carpenter's wife brought along a box of gently worn baby clothes from her twins. And the elderly churchgoer, who had never said more than a polite hello, left behind a knitted cap with the name Joy stitched right across the front. As if she had known it all along. Some showed up with compassion. Some came carrying quiet questions. A few arrived wearing judgment like a badge. And one came carrying fire. It was just after dusk when a knock rang out again. This time it wasn't hesitant, it was harsh. Quick. Caleb opened the door to find a man he didn't know, broad, red-faced, and reeking of gasoline and stale beer. "You Caleb Hart?" the man demanded. "I am." "That girl you've got in there, she's nothing but trouble. You know it. Hell, everyone does. You let her crawl back here and get comfortable? That's gonna cost you." Caleb didn't flinch. He folded his arms across his chest. "You've said your piece. Time to leave." But the man didn't budge. "You think people like her ever change? They don't. She's someone else's mess and you're about to make her yours." Caleb took a slow step forward, voice steady as steel. "You're standing on my porch, running your mouth about a woman who gave birth in a blizzard and never once asked for sympathy. So maybe you should ask yourself who the real mess is in this conversation." The man narrowed his eyes. "You're gonna regret this." "Then I'll regret it standing tall," Caleb replied. "Not crawling." The man spat into the snow, then stomped off into the night. 10 minutes later, Caleb smelled the smoke. Thin tendrils curling up from one of the front fence posts. He was outside in seconds, beating at the flames with a wet blanket before they had time to spread. It wasn't much, just a spark. But it was meant to send a message. Not a fire meant to destroy. A warning. When he turned back toward the house, Leah was already standing in the doorway. She didn't cry. She didn't ask if he was hurt. She just said, "I won't be the reason this place burns." Caleb stared at her, chest rising from effort, breath still thick from the cold. "You're not the reason." He stepped closer. "You're the reason it's alive." That night, the three of them sat quietly by the fire. Leah cradled Joy in her arms. Owen sat tucked close beside her. Caleb sat with a mug of black coffee, watching the flames flicker across the walls. The cabin didn't feel cramped or threatened. It felt different now, like it had grown stronger, braver. Leah looked over at Caleb, the baby's blanket pulled high around her chest. Why do they hate so easily? Caleb's answer came soft and even. Because hate is easier than understanding. He paused. And easier still than admitting they might have stood by when they should have helped. She nodded slowly. We can't stay hidden forever. I know. But we can't run either. Caleb turned to her, really looked. You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever. A long breath passed between them. And then Leah smiled. Not because all was fixed, but because someone had finally told her. She didn't have to keep running. She could stay. Just stay. The following morning, something unusual happened. A group of neighbors gathered just beyond the front porch. 5, maybe 6 of them, some men, some women, stood around a small camp stove someone had hauled in on a sled. No torches. No signs. No shouting. Just coffee. Silence. And the quiet conviction of people who had stopped pretending that staying neutral was the same as doing good. When Caleb stepped outside, a tall woman with long gray braids and worn leather gloves stepped forward. She handed him a box filled with canned food, met his eyes, and said simply, "We stand with the baby." Caleb's smile was small but real. Then come in. The snow that spring melted slow, as if it didn't want to let go of all the things buried beneath it. But the thaw came anyway, as it always does. Quiet, steady, persistent. Icicles shrank into trickling streams. Dead branches made way for soft green buds. The mountain shed its frostbitten armor and showed its soil again. Inside that cabin, though, life had already begun to bloom. Joy was nearly 3 months old now. She had Leah's chin, Caleb's nose, or so Leah liked to tease, and Owen's eyes. Not in color, but in depth. She looked at the world with a knowing gaze, as if she already understood it could be cruel, but also breathtaking. She didn't cry often, and when she did, it wasn't the piercing scream Caleb had braced for. It was gentler, a soft wail that felt more like a reminder than a complaint. "I'm still here," she seemed to say, "still watching." And Owen, who once spoke so rarely the house echoed with absence, had found his voice again. Not always. Not in busy places or around unfamiliar faces, but at home, in the quiet of morning light or the hush that settled just before bedtime. He spoke, softly, carefully, like someone who'd learned that words once lost were worth using with reverence. It started with books. Leah would sit curled on the couch with Joy resting in the crook of her arm, a picture book propped on her lap. Owen would settle in beside her, first just listening, then mouthing the words alongside her. Until slowly, one day, he read them aloud. The moment Owen read an entire page out loud by himself, Caleb quietly left the room. Not because he wasn't proud, but because something clenched inside his chest so tightly, he could barely draw breath. That evening, Caleb stood out on the porch, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, gazing up at the stars overhead. Leah stepped out beside him, moving with the familiar sway of someone who had just rocked a baby to sleep. "He read out loud," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard," Caleb murmured, eyes still fixed on the sky. She studied him for a moment. "Are you okay?" He nodded, but then shook his head. "It's just, I didn't think I'd ever hear that sound again." Leah placed a hand softly on his arm. "You gave him more than a name, Caleb. You gave him space, a quiet that didn't judge. Now he's choosing to fill it." Caleb swallowed hard. "That's because of you, Leah." But she smiled, shaking her head. "No, that's what love does. We just stepped out of the way and made room for it." Later that week, the schoolteacher, Ms. Carver, stopped by the cabin with a warm smile and a folded sheet of paper. A spring talent gathering was being organized, small and casual, meant to bring folks together after a long, punishing winter. "We're inviting the kids to read or sing or share anything really," she explained kindly. "Only if they feel up to it. Owen's not obligated." Leah thanked her, offering no promises, and tucked the invitation into the corner of the mirror above the kitchen sink. That evening, when Owen read it, his eyes flicked upward toward the adults, a hint of worry etched across his face. "You don't have to," Caleb said quickly, already sensing his hesitation. But Leah knelt beside Owen and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Only if you want to." Owen looked down again at the invitation. "Can Joy come?" he asked quietly. Even now, hearing him speak still felt like catching lightning in a bottle, rare, startling, and precious. Caleb and Leah both paused, then nodded in unison. She wouldn't miss it, Leah said, her smile soft and full. The evening of the event arrived like a gentle breeze slipping through a long-closed door. The town hall shimmered with white string lights overhead, and the faint smell of cinnamon and aged wood filled the air. Owen sat near the front, his knees bouncing under the chair, a notebook clutched tightly to his chest. Joy slept peacefully in Leah's arms, her tiny floral bonnet a gift from a neighbor. The room buzzed with the shuffle of folding chairs, quiet conversations, and the nervous energy that lingers before something brave happens. When Owen's name was called, he paused for only a second. Then slowly he stood. Each step he took toward the front of the room was steady, intentional. By the time he reached the microphone, the room had fallen completely silent. He opened his notebook and began to read. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was sure. It was clear. This is a story about a house in the woods. A house that was quiet. A house that hurt. Then a woman came with a baby in her belly. And she brought singing. And soup. And a name. The baby was born during a storm. Her name is Joy. This is a story about my family. It is not broken. It is ours. When he finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. Because no one clapped right away. Most of them couldn't. They were too busy wiping tears. Back at the cabin, Owen climbed into bed without a word or reminder. Joy was already sleeping soundly in her crib. Leah stood at the sink, drying the last of the dishes, while Caleb sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the lamplight like it carried the echo of Owen's words. When Leah turned to look at him, she saw it. The way the tightness in Caleb's shoulders had eased. How his face, for once, looked like it had finally let go of something heavy. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded. Then, after a beat, shook his head. "I keep thinking this can't be real." Leah stepped closer. "Which part?" Caleb looked up at her, eyes still glassy. "All of it. That he spoke. That he stood up there like that. That he said ours." Leah pulled out a chair and sat beside him. "You didn't rescue us, Caleb," she said softly. "You just made room. You let something bloom that never should have survived out here." She smiled. "Love like this, it doesn't show up with trumpets. It looks like this." Caleb turned toward her, emotion rising in his voice. "I've been afraid for so long. Afraid I'd mess it all up again. That I'd fail him, fail everyone." "You didn't," she whispered. "You gave him what no one else could. You stayed." A long, gentle silence followed. Not empty, but full of all the things they no longer needed to say aloud. Then, slowly, Caleb reached for her hand. Not out of necessity. Not by accident. But because he wanted to. Her hand was warm, steady, calloused with memory and strength. And she didn't let go. Something in both of them finally settled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hymn, bowing the branches with reverence. Inside, the little cabin didn't glow from firelight or electricity, but from something far deeper. The voice that had found its way back, and the love that had never left. The summer sun rose slow and golden over Elk Ridge, stretching its light across the gravel drive leading up to the cabin. On either side of the road, wildflowers had erupted, purple lupin, yellow daisies, orange columbine, all swaying gently in the morning breeze. The mountains, once wrapped in snow and ice, now stood tall and green beneath the clear sky. Inside, life moved in rhythm. Joy babbled in her crib. Owen stood at the table, carefully spreading jam on toast like he was performing delicate surgery. Leah hummed as she rinsed dishes, her hair tied back in a loose braid, and Caleb knelt at the screen door, adjusting a stubborn hinge with practiced hands. Everything about the morning was ordinary, until it wasn't. Owen heard it first, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Slow, deliberate, heavy. He darted to the window and pressed his nose to the glass, eyebrows shooting upward. "A car," he said. "A big one." Caleb stepped out onto the porch, shielding his eyes from the glare. And then he saw it, coming up the road, gleaming like it had rolled out of a different world, was a midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom. Not a truck, not a dusty SUV, not the kind of vehicle that belonged anywhere near muddy switchbacks or backwoods trails. Certainly not in Elk Ridge. It was a car that spoke of old money, of lineage and legacy, of the kind of power that buys silence, not attention. Leah stepped beside Caleb, drying her hands on a dish towel as she watched the gleaming vehicle ease up the drive. "That's not from around here," she murmured. Caleb gave a slow nod. "Definitely not." The car came to a smooth stop just before the porch. Its engine went quiet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click, and the door opened. Out stepped a woman, tall, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored coat the color of cream. Her heels crunched gently on the gravel, though everything about her posture said she wasn't used to walking anywhere she hadn't already conquered. No purse, just a slim envelope in one hand and a pair of fine leather gloves in the other. "Caleb Hart?" she asked, her voice deep and smooth, like music echoing in a cathedral. He stepped forward cautiously. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes shifted to Leah. "And you must be Leah." Leah gave a quiet nod, her heart thudding. The woman's expression softened. "Then I've come to the right place." Of course, they invited her in. You don't leave a woman like that waiting on a porch, no matter how many questions flood your mind. She stepped into the cabin like someone walking through a memory, her eyes pausing on the fireplace mantel, the worn stack of Owen's notebooks, and the small wooden crib tucked beside the sofa. When Joy let out a tiny squeal from her nest of blankets, the woman turned toward the sound like she'd been waiting to hear it her entire life. "She's beautiful," she said. Leah gave a small, nervous smile. "She's everything." The woman glanced at Caleb, then back to Leah. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." Caleb sat down slowly. "You're M." It wasn't a question. The woman nodded once. "My name is Eleanor West. I run a foundation based in Boston." Quietly, "We don't do websites or press releases. Just a web of eyes and ears stretched across the country." She placed the envelope on the table but didn't push it toward them. "Our mission is to help women escape circumstances that most people wouldn't believe are real." She paused before continuing. 3 months ago, someone on our network sent word, just a vague tip, a woman being auctioned off. No names, no coordinates, just a photo. A man handing over a canvas pouch, and a pregnant woman, barely able to stand. Leah's hand flew to her mouth, stunned. Eleanor gestured toward Caleb. That man stood out, not because of what he gave, but because of how he looked at her. Not like a burden, like someone who mattered. Caleb didn't respond. Eleanor smiled faintly. "So we kept watch from a distance. Made sure a few essentials arrived, just enough to keep you going, never enough to raise suspicion. We don't interfere, but we never disappear." Owen was staring at her now, eyes wide. Eleanor turned to him, her voice softening with warmth. "You were the first to reach back, you know. That picture you drew, the one tucked into the blanket. My assistant cried when she saw it. Owen flushed and looked down. Caleb finally spoke. Why come now? Why not stay in the shadows? Eleanor's tone shifted, her voice now measured and clear. Because I don't just support escapes. I support what comes after. And what's happening here, what you've built, it's rare. She tapped the envelope lightly. Inside is a grant. No strings, no taxes, no tracing. Enough to build, expand, provide for others if that's what you want. Or not. There's no obligation. Leah blinked, absorbing the weight of it all. Why us? She asked quietly. Eleanor held her gaze for a long time before answering. Because you took something brutal and made something beautiful out of it. Not with money, with gentleness, with patience, by staying. Then she turned toward Caleb. And you, Mr. Hart, you taught your son the most valuable lesson a father can teach. How to use his voice without ever raising it. Caleb cleared his throat. I never expected any of this. Eleanor's voice softened again. No one ever does. But maybe that's how you know it's real. An hour later, after sharing tea, cooing over joy, and promising Owen she'd send more art supplies, Eleanor stood by the door, her coat once more buttoned, gloves neatly in hand. Leah hesitated. Will we see you again? Eleanor gave a small smile. You won't need to. Then, with a gentler tone, but I hope you will. She turned to Caleb. Keep the porch light on, Mr. Hart. There are more people out there than you realize. He nodded. We will. Eleanor descended the porch steps, her heels clicking once more on the gravel, and disappeared behind the door of the Rolls-Royce. The engine came to life quietly, and the car slipped down the road like falling snow. That night, Leah found Caleb sitting alone on the porch, the envelope resting in his hands, still sealed. He didn't speak as she sat beside him. Together, they watched the sky fade from gold to deep blue, the moon rising slowly above the trees. Finally, Leah asked gently, Are you going to open it? Caleb looked at the envelope, then at the sky. Maybe tomorrow. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You know, she whispered, sometimes miracles show up looking plain. Caleb smiled, and behind them, in the quiet cabin, joy stirred softly in her crib, while Owen sat at the table, adding a new page to his notebook. At the top he wrote, Today the one who helped us became real, but the kindness, that was always real. A year slipped by, not with celebration or spectacle, but through quiet, sacred moments. Simple and extraordinary. Joy went from sitting to crawling to walking, each step full of bounce and light, like gravity couldn't quite catch her. Owen shot up in inches and confidence, his voice now part of the cabin's rhythm, woven into the walls like it had always belonged there. Leah laughed again, not the careful laugh of someone trying to heal, but the kind that echoed from a soul that knew she was home, and wasn't afraid to take up space in it. And Caleb stopped just surviving. He started living, not out of habit but with intention. He planted wildflowers by the steps, taught Owen how to bring an old radio back to life, and built a rocking chair with nothing but his hands and quiet determination. Not because they needed one, but because sometimes love makes you build things, just to hold it in place. One warm afternoon, Leah stood barefoot on the porch, joy balanced on her hip, watching clouds drift lazily across the ridge like worn-out stories being told again. The porch had become the soul of their little world. It was where they ate dinner on summer evenings, where Joy had taken her first wobbly steps, where Owen curled up with books, reading aloud, and where local women stopped by, not always for help, but for the peace. Caleb joined them, carrying 2 mugs. He kissed Joy's curls, leaned against the post, and took in the sky. "She's growing fast," he said. "She's starting to say real words," Leah replied with a smile. "She came into the world ready," Caleb said softly. Just then, Joy pointed toward the trees and squealed, "Bee." There wasn't a bee anywhere in sight, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of her voice, bright and certain, echoing off the cabin walls like a hymn. That night, they ate on the porch. Owen had baked cornbread with Leah crooked but proud. Joy gnawed on hers happily while Caleb sliced vegetables from the garden they'd planted that spring. Every bit of it felt earned. That's the quiet truth about peace. It doesn't blow in with fireworks. It settles in like this. A small hand in yours. Someone breathing beside you without flinching. The quiet knowledge that, come morning, you'll choose one another all over again. Later, Caleb lit the porch lantern. Its soft glow spilled down the steps, lighting the wildflowers dancing in the wind. It was the same lantern he'd left dark for years, but now it came on every evening like a promise. Not just for them, but for anyone still wandering in the dark, looking for proof that light exists. As dusk deepened, Leah leaned into him. Joy lay asleep in her lap. A warm, soft weight. Owen sat nearby, legs folded, sketching in his worn notebook. He held it up when he finished. It showed the porch. Leah rocking Joy. Caleb beside them. Owen at their feet. And stars overhead. At the top, he'd written, "This is our porch. It used to be dark. Now it is full of light." Leah reached for his hand. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Caleb looked at Owen, his voice gentle. "You're going to be an author one day." Owen grinned. "I think I already am." And they all laughed. Not loudly, but the kind of laughter that only comes when something that was once broken has found its shape again. A breeze swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of pine. And something sweeter still. Lilacs from the bush Caleb had planted near Joy's window. Leah suddenly reached into her apron and pulled out a folded note. "I've been holding on to this," she said. "Found it tucked in Joy's onesie. I think it was from Eleanor." She smoothed out the creases and read aloud. "A house is built with wood and nails. A home is built with time and tenderness. You've made a home. Keep your porch light on. Someone else is still looking for the way." They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. They let the silence carry it. And the next morning, the porch light still glowed. Not because someone forgot to turn it off, but because you never know who might be out there, tired, hoping, searching for a light to follow. A year later, the porch had changed again. There were 2 rocking chairs now, a second flower bed, handprints painted along the railing. Owen's idea. He insisted Joy at hers too, even if it ended up just a purple smear across the wood. The mailbox stayed full these days. Letters from townsfolk, from strangers, from places they'd never even heard of. All of them saying the same quiet thing. "I heard about what you did. I didn't think there was a place for someone like me. But now I think maybe there is." They kept every letter, each one folded carefully and stored in the old tin that once held Eleanor's anonymous notes. A new label sat taped to the lid, written in Owen's bold, careful handwriting. "Miracles, daily." That autumn, one more letter arrived. No return address, just a small, unassuming card. The handwriting was familiar. "You once needed a miracle. Now you are one. Don't forget that. M." Leah read it aloud, then tucked it into the tin with the others. She looked over at Caleb, bouncing Joy gently on his hip, while Owen read by the hearth, his voice steady and soft. "Do you think it's true?" she asked. Caleb looked at her, puzzled. That were miracles? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his eyes drift across the room. The porch, the firelight, the family they'd become, the peace they'd carved out of heartache and grit. Then he smiled. A real one. One that knew the cost. And how worth it all was. Yeah, he said. I think we are. And sometimes the quietest kindness ends up becoming the loudest miracle. If this story meant something to you, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments and help us build a community not just of stories, but of hearts stretched across the miles. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories that remind us of the goodness still alive in the world, consider subscribing. No pressure, just a light left on. In case you ever want to come back, thanks for spending your time with us. We're so glad you're here.